Hey everyone, it is Krista and we are here today to do the last part of the quilt in the Design Along series. This stage is going to be trimming the extra batting and backing off your quilt, and we will be learning how to cut those strips for binding, preparing that binding, and attaching it. Before we move into the trimming section, I have one more tip to share with you. And that is to place one more stitch line going around the entire edge of your quilt before you start that trimming. You would have noticed that as you were quilting and you moved off to the edges and hopefully into the batting and the backing, that you still would have had these pockets of fabric at the end that weren't like stitched down together. So adding in that last stay stitch to keep everything together is going to be really helpful, both while you're trimming and then later when we go to add on the binding. There are two ways that you can go about trimming up your quilt, and one is just using a pair of scissors, and you'll just cut along kind of like you're cutting your quilt out of a rectangle out of a piece of paper, but you're cutting out your quilt from the extra backing and batting. The other method is to use an acrylic ruler and a rotary blade, and this is the method that I will be showing you how to do in the video because it's just a little bit more involved, faster and easier in a lot of ways than using your scissors, but a little bit of technique to making that work for you. So this is how I'll be trimming up my quilt. When you are using a ruler, you want to try and find a place in your quilting or your piecing that you can measure your ruler up to. So I'm looking along the edge over here, and it's fine if I end up shaving off little bits of fabric that maybe got kind of pushed out a little bit over, and there's going to be some parts that maybe don't even get cut all that close to either, because for whatever reason they kind of pulled in a little bit, and that's just the nature of quilting and how things end up on the edge of your quilt at this stage. So what I want to do is find a fairly consistent line within my quilt that I can use to guide my ruler along. And for me, that line is the seam here along my last block along the edge of the quilt. So it's kind of all the way down through here. And using the 8-inch mark on my ruler lines up really well with this. In a couple of ways. So there's a little bit of a highlighted part on either side of my markings on my ruler, and they do go out 1/8 of an inch. And if I've got the edge of that kind of highlighted portion lined up all along that seam line, and I'm checking along here, I'm seeing that for the most part, all my fabric comes pretty much right to the edge of my ruler. Sometimes it's just slightly over and sometimes slightly under, but it's a pretty level line for me to cut along. And that's going to allow me to have a nice clean edge here for my binding. And I'm not cutting away really any part of my fabric when I'm working on squaring this up. And with my ruler aligned along the block where I wanted it, and it is just slightly off the edge of the end of my quilt here. I also have a couple of weights, and these weights are like extra hands. I do like to place them on the quilt because sometimes while you're doing this, the quilt wants to maybe shift around on you a little bit, and definitely these rulers like to shift a lot too, especially if you've got some extra kind of pressure and weight and things they slide. So this helps prevent movement of the ruler. And sometimes you're kind of, coaxing that edge of your quilt a little bit, and it does also help put a little extra weight through that and on your fabric, so everything just stays right where you want it when you are making your cut along the side here. So I'm ready to make that first cut. And I just go as far as I can to the edge of my ruler. I remove the weights off to the side, kind of slide everything up, and I just give it a shift down. And I'm ready now to realign. So I'm going to be looking for kind of the same lines in my quilt that I lined up to, and that will be my guide for squaring everything up. So it's that 1/4 inch mark for me, 5 1/4 inches from the edge. Once my ruler is aligned and I'm happy with it, I place down that weight. And I cut a little more. So this is the process that I will go through all the way around my quilt until the whole thing has been trimmed off.